They told me I should forget her. But they never told me how to get the scent of her perfume out of my memory. It was rain and old books and something else, something green, like crushed leaves. I noticed it the first time she reached past me for a volume of Rilke, her arm a bare, warm brush against my sleeve in the quiet of the bookshop. The air shifted. It wasn't just the dusty, sunlit moats anymore, it was her. Elara was her name. She was mid-40s, with a grace that seemed less about movement and more about a profound, settled presence. She didn't just enter a room, she arrived in it, and the space rearranged itself around her quiet gravity. I'm Leo, 25, and all I had was a restless heart and a tendency to watch people from a safe distance. But with her, safe distances collapsed. That afternoon, the shop was empty save for us. She was reshelving in the poetry section, and I was pretending to browse. You've been staring at the same page for 10 minutes, her voice was low, a soft hum that vibrated in the stillness. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation, laced with a faint, knowing amusement. I looked up, the words on the page a blur. It's a good page. A small smile touched her eyes before it reached her lips. Is it? She moved closer, her gaze dropping to the book in my hands. Ah. Neruda. That explains the intense concentration. She was close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her. Her finger, elegant and without rings, came to rest on the edge of the open book, her nail tapping lightly on a single line. I want to do with you what spring does with the cherry trees. My breath hitched. It was a physical reaction, a stupid, hopeful little jolt in my chest. I couldn't form a sentence. The air was too thick, too full of her. Her hand lifted from the page, and for a breathtaking second, her fingers brushed against mine. It wasn't an accident. It was a whisper of a touch, deliberate and fleeting, but it sent a current up my arm that left my skin humming. Her eyes met mine, and they were a deep, quiet ocean of things unsaid. There was a question in them, and a warning, and a shared, terrifying understanding. She was the one who looked away first, a faint pink tinging her cheeks. She took a small, deliberate step back, creating a space between us that felt like a chasm. We're closing soon, she said, her voice slightly unsteady. It was the first crack I'd seen in her composure. I just nodded, my throat too tight for words. I watched her walk back towards the counter, the scent of rain and old books and crushed leaves trailing behind her. I stood there, the ghost of her touch still burning on my hand, the unspoken words clogging my throat. And then the little bell above the shop door jingled, harsh and intrusive. A man's voice, familiar and cheerful, called out, Elara. You ready to lock up? Her head snapped up, her eyes wide for a fraction of a second before she smoothed her expression into a polite mask. She looked from him, standing in the open doorway, back to me, still stranded by the poetry shelf. The charged, silent world we'd built for a moment shattered. And all I could do was watch as she turned away from me. The man was her husband. David. I learned his name a week later when he came by again, draping an arm around Elara's shoulders with an easy familiarity that felt like a physical blow. He was her age, with a laugh that filled the quiet spaces she so beautifully inhabited. I started coming to the shop less, then stopped for 2 whole weeks. It was a futile exercise. I just end up walking past the big front window, a ghost haunting my own life, hoping for a glimpse of her. My apartment felt emptier afterwards. My last relationship had ended in a slow fade, a mutual understanding that we were just placeholders for the real thing. I was tired of being a placeholder. When I finally went back, a battered copy of The Unbearable Lightness of Being in hand to return, the air between us was different. Charged with my absence, and with everything we hadn't said. I thought you'd given up on literature, she said, her voice careful as she took the book. Her fingers brushed mine again. This time, neither of us pulled away immediately. Just on trying to pretend, I said, the words out before I could stop them. Her eyes flickered up to mine, a silent question. She looked tired. A delicate vulnerability around her eyes that hadn't been there before. David thinks I should sell the shop, she said softly, looking down at the book in her hands. He says it's a money pit. That I'm clinging to a dying dream. It was the most personal thing she'd ever shared. A confession whispered in the dusty quiet. It explained the sadness that clung to her, the way she sometimes looked around the shelves as if saying a slow goodbye. It's not a dream, I said, my voice low. It's a heart. And he's asking you to sell it. Her breath caught. She looked at me, truly looked at me, and for a moment, all her carefully maintained walls were gone. I saw the woman beneath, the one who was lonely, who felt unseen, who was terrified of the quiet neglect her future promised. She reached out, her hand resting lightly on my forearm. Her touch was warm, solid. A connection that went straight to my core. You see too much, Leo. I only see you, I whispered. The air between us crackled, thick with the unsaid. Her gaze dropped to my lips, then back to my eyes. Her hand was still on my arm, her thumb making a tiny, unconscious sweeping motion against my skin. We stood there, suspended in the dim light of the shop, the world outside forgotten. It was just us, and the terrifying, electric truth hanging in the silence between our ragged breaths. The bell above the door chimed. We sprang apart as if scalded. Ilara's hand flew from my arm, her face flushing a deep, mortified red. She turned towards the shelves, her back to the door, her shoulders rigid. A woman's voice called out, Ilara. Just returning this, darling. It was a regular, a friend of David's. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. The air, which a second before had been warm and charged, was now cold with panic. I could still feel the ghost of her thumb on my skin. I busied myself with a shelf, my hands trembling. I heard the woman chat about a book club, her voice a cheerful, oblivious drone. Ilara's replies were clipped, polite, but I could hear the strain in them. I chanced a glance. She was nodding, a tight, professional smile on her face, but her eyes were wide, locked on a point on the floor. The moment stretched, agonizing. Every rustle of a paper bag, every casual laugh from the woman felt like a spotlight on our guilt. My own burned in my throat. I was the complication, the secret that could unravel her life. Finally, the woman left. The bell jingled again, and the door clicked shut. Silence. Thick and heavy. Ilara didn't move. She stood with her back to me, her head bowed. I could see the tense line of her neck. Ilara, I started, my voice rough. She turned. The professional mask was gone, replaced by raw fear. This is a mistake, Leo. It didn't feel like a mistake. That's what makes it worse. The words were a desperate whisper. She hugged herself, looking suddenly small. I'm twice your age. People will talk. They'll see what I am. And what's that? A cliché. The word hung in the air, ugly and final. I took a step towards her. Then another. She didn't retreat. Her breath hitched as I stopped, close enough to feel the heat from her body, to see the flecks of gold in her troubled eyes. I don't care what people see, I murmured, my voice low. I only care what you feel. Her resolve was crumbling. I could see it in the parting of her lips, the way her gaze dropped to my mouth. We were a breath apart. The space between us hummed with a need so potent it was a physical force, pulling us together. Her hand came up, not to push me away, but to rest, trembling, against my chest, right over my pounding heart. A final, fragile barrier. We stood there, frozen on the edge of the impossible, our ragged breaths mingling in the space we were too afraid to cross, and yet, couldn't bear to leave. The breaking point came a week later, drenched in rain. I saw him through the bookshop window, David, getting out of his car, a scowl on his face as he fumbled with an umbrella. I was already inside, the damp chill clinging to my jacket. Elara was at the counter, her posture tense. She'd seen him too. When the door slammed shut outside, a tremor went through her. "He's angry," she whispered, more to herself than to me. The sale fell through. The buyers backed out. David's voice boomed from the entrance, "This place is a curse, Elara. A damn money pit." He didn't see me, hidden in the shadows of the philosophy aisle. He was a storm cloud, his frustration a physical force in the room. I watched her shrink, her shoulders curling inward, her face a mask of quiet humiliation. It was the "I ruined it" look, the weight of a lifetime of small regrets. He left as abruptly as he came, the door rattling in its frame. The silence he left behind was suffocating. Elara didn't move. She just stood there, her head bowed, her hands gripping the edge of the counter like it was the only solid thing left. I couldn't watch from a distance anymore. I walked to the counter. She didn't look up. I could see the tracks of silent tears on her cheeks. Gently, so gently, I reached out and brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, tucking it behind her ear. My fingers lingered on her skin, which was soft and cool. She flinched at the touch, but then leaned into it, a desperate, quiet surrender. "He's wrong," I said, my voice low and rough near her ear. "This place isn't a curse. It's the only place that's ever felt like a prayer." A sob escaped her, a raw, broken sound. She turned into me, her forehead coming to rest against my shoulder. I could feel the fine tremors running through her body, the dampness of her tears through my shirt. I brought my hand up, cupping the back of her head, my fingers tangling in her silken hair. She smelled of rain and salt and that heartbreaking scent of crushed leaves. She tilted her face up to mine. Her eyes were pools of wrecked hope and a longing so deep it stole my breath. Her lips were parted. The space between us vanished, filled only with the frantic beat of my heart and the soft sound of her breathing. My gaze dropped to her mouth. Every atom in my body was screaming to close the distance, to finally, Elara, I breathed, the word a confession and a question. Her eyes fluttered shut. And the bell above the door jingled. It wasn't David. It was a young woman, a stranger, dripping onto the welcome mat. "Sorry, is it okay to come in? The rain is insane." Elara jerked away from me as if electrocuted. The moment shattered, leaving us raw and exposed in its wake. She turned to the customer with a strained smile, her voice a trembling, professional chime. "Of course. Feel free to dry off." The woman wandered into the fiction section, oblivious. The space between Elara and me now felt like a canyon, churning with everything that had almost happened. My shoulder still burned where her head had rested. She wouldn't look at me. Her hands were shaking as she straightened a stack of receipts that didn't need straightening. The air was thick with the ghost of my touch in her hair, the warmth of her body against mine. "Elara," I whispered, the name a plea. She finally met my gaze. The wrecked hope in her eyes had been replaced by a cold, sharp fear. "You should go, Leo." "No. Not like this. It's always going to be like this," she hissed, her voice low and frantic. "Don't you see? There's always going to be a bell, or a customer, or a husband." The word was a weapon she used on herself. She flinched saying it. "Then leave him." The words were out, hanging in the air, reckless and inevitable. She stared at me, her breath catching. It was the line we had never dared to cross, the truth I had been too afraid to speak. Now it was here, naked and demanding. "It's not that simple," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why?" She looked down, her fingers gripping the edge of the counter until her knuckles were white. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the soft patter of rain and the distant hum of the stranger browsing the shelves. "He's my husband," she finally said, as if that explained everything. "That's not an answer. That's a title." Her head snapped up, her eyes blazing with a sudden, fierce emotion. What do you want from me, Leo? I want you to choose yourself. Choose this. I gestured between us, the space still crackling. Choose me. The confession hung there, silencing her. I saw the war in her eyes, the deep-seated regret of a life half-lived clashing with the terrifying prospect of a new one. The longing wasn't just mine anymore, it was ours, a shared, desperate current. She took a step closer, her body moving as if pulled by an invisible thread. She was so close I could see the pulse fluttering at the base of her throat. Her hand came up, not to touch me, but to hover near my chest, a trembling, silent acknowledgement of the precipice we were on. Meet me, she breathed, the words so quiet I felt them more than heard them. Tomorrow. After closing the back door. Then she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, my heart thundering, the scent of rain and crushed leaves an impossible promise clinging to the air. The rain had stopped, leaving the alley behind the bookshop slick and gleaming under a single, yellow bulb. The air was cold, sharp with the smell of wet asphalt and the damp wood of the crates I was leaning against. Every nerve was alive, straining for the sound of the back door. When it finally opened, it was just a crack, then wider. Elara slipped out, pulling her cardigan tight around her. She hadn't seen me yet in the shadows. She looked vulnerable, her face pale in the dim light, her eyes searching. I stepped forward. I'm here. She started, a hand flying to her chest. Leo. Just my name, exhaled like a relief and a curse. We stood feet apart, the space between us a charged field. The world had narrowed to this alley, to the sound of a distant drip, to the visible puff of her breath in the cold air. I can't do this in the dark, she whispered, her voice raw. I need to see you. I moved closer, into the pool of light. Close enough to see the flecks of gray in her dark eyes, the faint lines of worry and laughter etched around them. Close enough to touch. I meant what I said, I told her, my voice low. I'm not asking you to fix your life. I'm just asking you to let me be in it. Her eyes searched mine, desperate, hungry. It's not that simple. It's a wrecking ball, Leo. My life, it's a comfortable, quiet ruin. This, she gestured between us, her hand trembling. This would burn it all down. Maybe it needs burning down. A broken sound escaped her, half laugh, half sob. You're 25. You think starting over is an adventure. When you're my age, it's a confession of failure. It's not failure, I murmured, stepping so close I could feel the heat from her body. It's bravery. My hand came up, my fingers gently brushing a stray tear from her cheek. She leaned into the touch, her eyes fluttering shut for a second. When they opened, the war was over. The fear was still there, but it was eclipsed by a need so profound it stole my breath. I'm terrified, she confessed, her voice a bare whisper. So am I. That was the truth that finally bridged the gap. Her hand came up to cover mine, pressing my palm against her cool cheek. Her other hand found my chest, fisting in my jacket, pulling me the final, inevitable inch. Our foreheads touched. Our breaths mingled, white clouds merging in the cold air. We stood there, not kissing, not yet, just holding the space, understanding the cost written in each other's eyes. It was no longer a question of if. It was a silent, shared acceptance of what comes next. The quiet ruin or the beautiful fire. And in the stillness, we made our choice. The space between our lips vanished. It wasn't a frantic, desperate collision. It was a slow, deliberate surrender. Her mouth was soft against mine, tasting of salt and rain and a lifetime of quiet longing. My hands came up to cradle her face, my thumbs stroking her cheeks as she melted into me, her fists unclenching in my jacket, her hands flattening against my chest, over my pounding heart. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. The world, for a moment, had been perfectly, utterly still. She let out a shaky breath, a real smile, small and wondrous, touching her lips for the first time. "Oh," she whispered. I leaned my forehead against hers, our eyes closed. Yeah. There were no more words about age, about ruin, about what anyone else would think. Those fears had been real, but they were echoes now, drowned out by the simple, profound rightness of this. We stood wrapped in each other in the cold alley, the warmth between us a shield against everything. "I don't know what happens tomorrow," she murmured, her voice steadier now. "I don't either," I admitted, pulling back just enough to look at her. I brushed a thumb over her bottom lip. "But we'll figure it out. Together." She nodded, a single, decisive movement. The doubt was gone from her eyes, replaced by a clear, quiet certainty. She took my hand, lacing her fingers through mine. Her grip was firm, real. Together. We didn't go back inside. We walked, hand in hand, through the glistening streets, not towards a defined future, but away from a lonely past. The silence between us was no longer filled with tension, but with a profound, settled peace. We stopped under a street lamp, and I pressed a soft, lingering kiss to her forehead. She leaned into it, her head resting on my shoulder, her body fitting perfectly against mine. It wasn't an end. It was the first, fragile page of a new story, written not in grand gestures, but in the quiet, sensual language of a hand held tightly, a shared glance, and the brave, beautiful choice to finally be seen. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?